In the sprawling countryside of Surrey, a reclusive billionaire with a reputation for cold calculation discovers that even the smallest acts of kindness can shatter the walls around his heart. When he sets out to secretly test the character of his new maid's young daughter, he never expects that a single night will change everything he thought he knew about trust, loyalty, and the courage to do what's right. The morning mist clung to the emerald lawns of Ashwood Manor, weaving through the hedges and across the ancient stone steps that led to the grand entrance. The estate had stood for centuries on the outskirts of Surrey, its tall windows glinting like watchful eyes in the pale sunlight. Inside, beneath high vaulted ceilings, Alexander Wycliffe moved with quiet precision. The silence was palpable, broken only by the soft echo of his polished shoes on the marble floors. Despite the grandeur surrounding him, oil paintings, crystal chandeliers, the subtle scent of lavender drifting through the halls, there was a chill in the manor that had little to do with the weather. Alexander had become a billionaire before his 40th birthday. His fortune amassed through a blend of technological brilliance and ruthless business acumen. He had inherited nothing but a family name and a crumbling house. Everything else he'd carved for himself from a world that admired results more than sentiment. Those close to him, if anyone could truly be called close, knew Alexander as a man of habit and skepticism, a man who trusted numbers over people and reason over emotion. The staff he kept was minimal, handpicked for their discretion and efficiency. They were invisible as much as possible, a part of the machinery that kept the manor running, not companions. On this particular morning, the air inside the house felt charged with something new, an anticipation, perhaps, or the faintest tremor of change. It was the day Evelyn Okoro and her daughter, Amara, would arrive. Evelyn had come highly recommended from an agency in London. Her references were spotless, her demeanor described as unfailingly dignified and remarkably kind. But what had truly piqued Alexander's interest was that she would be bringing her young daughter with her, a rare request that he'd granted more out of curiosity than compassion. Outside, the gravel crunched beneath the tires of a modest blue hatchback as it made its careful way up the winding drive. From the window of his study, Alexander watched the car come to a gentle stop. He noted the way Evelyn stepped out first, straightening her back and smoothing the hem of her coat before opening the rear door for her daughter. Amara emerged, her wide eyes drinking in the manor with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Clutching a small canvas backpack embroidered with fading sunflowers, the pair stood for a moment in the early light, taking in the silent majesty of their new home. Evelyn was a woman in her late 30s, her posture both graceful and sturdy, as if she carried the weight of many worlds on her shoulders and yet refused to bend. Her skin was a warm, deep brown, her hair drawn back into a neat bun, and her eyes possessed a quiet intelligence. Amara, barely 8, was the sort of child who radiated energy even when standing still. Her curiosity vibrated through every small movement, and her smile, though shy, promised warmth to anyone patient enough to earn it. The front door swung open at their approach, revealing Mrs. Harrow, the manor's long-serving housekeeper. Mrs. Harrow was brisk and severe, her gray hair always pinned with military precision. She welcomed Evelyn and Amara with a nod, not quite a smile, and beckoned them inside. The entrance hall was vast and cool, the morning sun painting stripes across the marble floor. Alexander remained out of sight, observing from the gallery above. It was his habit to watch new arrivals before making himself known. He preferred to form impressions without the filter of social performance, to see people as they truly were when they thought themselves unwatched. He noted the way Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on Amara's shoulder, the way the girl's gaze flickered around the hall, absorbing every detail with silent wonder. "You'll find your rooms prepared," Mrs. Harrow announced, her voice echoing faintly. "Breakfast will be served in the kitchen at 8. Mr. Wycliffe expects punctuality and discretion. If you require anything, you may speak to me." Evelyn inclined her head in thanks, but it was Amara who spoke, her voice soft and earnest. "Thank you, ma'am. It's very beautiful here. Mrs. Harrow blinked in surprise, her stern features softening just a fraction before she turned on her heel and led them toward the servants' quarters. Their rooms, though modest compared to the manor's grand suites, were comfortable and filled with light. Evelyn took care in unpacking, smoothing Amara's clothes into drawers and lining up her small shoes by the bed. She moved with practiced efficiency, but there was a gentleness to her touch, as though each item was a memory she refused to relinquish. Amara, meanwhile, pressed her face to the window, watching the distant shapes of deer move through the morning mist. Breakfast was a quiet affair. The staff table was set in the old kitchen, all worn oak and blue-tiled hearth. Mrs. Harrow presided like a general, issuing instructions and answering questions with clipped precision. Evelyn listened attentively, taking mental notes of her duties and the rhythms of the household. Amara ate silently, feet swinging above the flagstones, her eyes darting from face to face, searching for kindness or danger. After the meal, Mrs. Harrow introduced Evelyn to the rest of the staff. Mr. Bell, the elderly gardener with earth under his nails and stories in his eyes. Maria, the quiet laundry maid who rarely spoke but whose laughter, when it came, was musical and unexpected. And Cook, who ruled the kitchen with flour-dusted hands and a surprisingly soft heart. Each greeted Evelyn politely, but it was clear that new faces were rare at Ashwood Manor, and trust would take time to grow. Alexander watched the introductions from afar, hidden in the labyrinthine corridors of the house. He found himself curious, almost despite himself, about how Evelyn would adapt, how Amara would navigate the complex, unspoken rules of an ancient English estate. He wondered if their presence would disrupt the order he'd so carefully maintained, or if they would simply fade into the background as so many before them had. The day unfolded in gentle routines. Evelyn began her duties with quiet determination, dusting and polishing, scrubbing and straightening, her movements efficient yet never hurried. She greeted every member of the staff with courtesy, offering small smiles and assistance where she could. Amara, with Mrs. Harrow's reluctant permission, explored the walled garden under the watchful eye of Mr. Bell, who showed her how to coax roses into bloom and told her the names of every bird that visited the fountain. By mid-afternoon, Alexander allowed himself to be seen. He appeared in the drawing room, reviewing paperwork as Mrs. Harrow introduced Evelyn formally. "Mr. Wycliffe, this is Evelyn Okoro, our new housekeeper." Evelyn stood straight, meeting his gaze with steady composure. "Thank you for the opportunity, sir. I look forward to serving your household." Her voice was calm, her accent marked by the gentle music of London's southern boroughs. Alexander nodded, offering a perfunctory welcome, his expression unreadable. Amara lingered at her mother's side, her eyes wide, her hand tightening around the warm strap of her backpack. Alexander glanced at the child, noting the uncertainty and hope mingled in her gaze. "And this must be Amara," he said, his tone neutral. "I trust you will find everything you need." Amara managed a small smile, but her mother's hand on her shoulder told her that this was not the moment for questions or chatter. As the day wore on, the initial awkwardness began to fade, replaced by the gentle rhythm of shared routines. Yet, beneath the surface, the manor seemed to hold its breath, as if awaiting some inevitable disruption. Alexander, alone in his study as evening approached, found his thoughts returning to Evelyn and her daughter. He prided himself on reading people, on seeing through facades, yet there was something about them, a resilience, perhaps, or an unspoken history, that defied easy understanding. Night fell softly over Ashwood Manor, the grounds bathed in moonlight, the house itself settling into a familiar hush. In the small room she now called home, Evelyn tucked Amara into bed, smoothing her hair and whispering a prayer in a language older than England itself. "Will we be all right here, Mama?" Amara asked, her voice muffled by the blankets. Evelyn smiled, her eyes reflecting both hope and exhaustion. "We will, my love. We always find a way." Evelyn lay awake long after Amara's breathing had settled into the gentle, reassuring rhythm of sleep. The unfamiliar creaks and distant hum of the manor's old pipes kept her mind turning. But it was more than just the strangeness of her new surroundings that unsettled her. She thought about the life they'd left behind in the city, the cramped flat, the constant background noise of traffic, the people who had either watched her with suspicion or ignored her completely. Ashwood Manor was a different world, one with its own set of rules and, perhaps, its own kinds of dangers. Her decision to accept a position here had been made out of necessity. After her husband's death, the delicate balance she'd managed for years crumbled. There were bills, school uniforms, doctor's fees. She'd found herself juggling 2 jobs and still coming up short each month. When the agency called with a live-in opportunity outside London, she'd hesitated, not for her own sake but for Amara's. She wanted more for her daughter, more space, more safety, more hope. Now, in the hush of her new room, Evelyn questioned whether she'd made the right choice, whether the promise of stability outweighed the uncertainty of starting over. Morning arrived gently, golden sunlight spilling across Amara's quilt as birdsong drifted in through the open window. Evelyn rose early, moving quietly so as not to wake her daughter. She dressed in her plainest uniform and pinned her hair back, her mind already cycling through the day's tasks. In the adjoining room, Amara rolled over, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, a gift from her father on her 3rd birthday, and burrowed deeper into the covers. Downstairs, Mrs. Harrow was already bustling about the kitchen, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She nodded at Evelyn's punctual arrival, then handed her a list of duties written in neat, looping script. "I expect attention to detail," she said, as though it were a warning and not simply an expectation. "Mr. Wycliffe likes his home immaculate." Evelyn accepted the list with a grateful nod, tucking it into her apron. The morning's work was hard but satisfying. The manor's windows gleamed beneath Evelyn's careful touch, the brass banisters polished to a mirror sheen. She moved quietly from room to room, learning the peculiarities of each: the sticky lock on the linen closet, the faded water stain behind the library curtains, the way the sunlight slanted just so through the breakfast room's leaded glass. Occasionally, she would catch a glimpse of Alexander Wycliffe as he strode purposefully down a corridor, his focus absolute, his presence almost spectral. He rarely spoke to her directly, yet she sensed that he noticed everything. Amara's first full day at the manor was a blend of wonder and uncertainty. With her mother's permission, she wandered the walled gardens, marveling at the riot of color from early roses and tangled honeysuckle. Mr. Bell, the gardener, greeted her with a warm, gap-toothed smile and showed her how to plant seeds in the rich, dark soil. "If you listen," he whispered conspiratorially, "you'll hear the earth talking back to you." Amara giggled, the sound light and hopeful, and for a while, the loneliness she'd carried from the city seemed to melt away. The staff took notice of Amara's gentle curiosity. Maria, the laundry maid, left a handful of sugared plums on her pillow with a note written in careful English, "For sweet dreams." Cook, gruff but kind, let her help knead dough for the evening's bread, teaching her the old rhyme about patience and yeast. Each small gesture was a silent welcome, a thread in the tapestry of acceptance slowly forming around the newcomers. After lunch, Evelyn and Amara took a rare moment together on a bench near the orchard. They shared sandwiches and apples, the late spring air fragrant with blossoms. "Are you happy here, Mama?" Amara asked, her eyes searching. Evelyn considered the question before answering, wanting to be truthful but not to burden her child. "It's different," she replied at last, smoothing a curl from Amara's forehead. "But I think it could be good for us. We just have to be patient." That afternoon, Alexander held a meeting in his study with Mrs. Harrow, reviewing household accounts and schedules. His attention, though, wandered to the window, where he spotted Amara helping Mr. Bell untangle ivy from the old sundial. There was something about her laughter, unrestrained, infectious, that pierced the habitual armor of his composure. He quickly turned back to his ledger, irritated by his own distraction. Alexander prided himself on his ability to read people. Years in boardrooms and negotiation suites had sharpened his instincts for ambition, deceit, and desperation. Yet Evelyn Okoro defied easy categorization. She was diligent, yes, but there was a grace in her movements and a softness in her tone that seemed immune to the harshness of his world. Alexander caught himself watching her more than once, wondering at the strength it must take to leave everything behind and begin again. As evening approached, the manor's atmosphere shifted. Growing hushed and expectant, the staff finished their chores and gathered in the kitchen for a simple dinner. Conversation flowed more easily now, with Amara's stories about city life prompting laughter and incredulous shakes of the head. Even Mrs. Harrow allowed herself a small, private smile as she sipped her tea. After dinner, Evelyn found a note on her pillow in the neat, precise handwriting of Mrs. Harrow. You and Amara are invited to join the staff for Sunday tea this weekend. Attendance is expected. Evelyn smiled, recognizing the invitation for the welcome it was, veiled though it might be in duty. Amara fell asleep quickly that night, exhausted by new sights and kindnesses. Evelyn stayed awake, reading by the faint glow of her bedside lamp. Her mind wandered to the future, of schools, new friends, maybe even a garden of their own. She thought of Alexander Wycliffe, too, and the unreadable look in his eyes when he'd spoken to her that morning. There was more to the man than his fortune or reputation, she sensed, though what it was remained a mystery. Elsewhere in the manor, Alexander stood alone on the balcony outside his study, gazing at the moonlit gardens. He could hear distant laughter from the staff kitchen, the sound carrying easily in the still night. There was a strange comfort in it, a reminder of the life that persisted quietly around him. Despite, or perhaps because of, his isolation, he wondered, not for the first time, if the house had grown too large for one man's company. As the clock struck midnight, Ashwood Manor lay wrapped in darkness and silence once more. But beneath the stillness, change was brewing, small, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. New presences, new routines, new hope. In her sleep, Amara dreamed of running through endless gardens, sunlight in her hair and laughter on the wind. And in the quiet spaces of the old house, the future waited to be written. Sunday dawned with gentle rain pattering against the high windows, turning the gardens into a world of glistening leaves and shimmering puddles. Amara woke first, listening to the sound and feeling a familiar ache for the city, a place noisy, rough, but full of warmth and stories. Here, the air seemed to whisper, promising new beginnings if only she were brave enough to listen. She slipped from her small bed and pressed her nose to the cool glass, watching the droplets trace winding paths toward the windowsill. Downstairs, the staff moved with a quiet camaraderie born from years of shared routines. Cook's laughter rumbled through the kitchen as Maria teased him about a misplaced tin of treacle. Mr. Bell appeared at the back door, boots muddy from an early round of feeding the ducks. Evelyn greeted each of them in turn, her smile gentle and her hands always busy, chopping, tidying, folding. She felt the eyes of the household upon her, weighing her place here, yet she carried herself with a dignity that asked for nothing and offered everything. After breakfast, Amara wandered the manor's ground floor, careful not to venture where she'd been told not to go. The house seemed to breathe with its own pulse, the distant chime of clocks, the whisper of doors, the lingering scent of lemon oil and old books. In the library, she discovered a shelf of children's classics, faded but well-loved, and lost herself in a world of pirates and secret gardens until the sky outside began to clear. Alexander noticed the small changes Amara's presence brought to the house. There was a new drawing, clearly done by a child's hand, tacked onto the corner of the staff notice board. A sunny yellow manor, a smiling girl, a brown-skinned woman beside her, and a dog that looked suspiciously like Mr. Bell's terrier. There were fewer silences at mealtimes, and sometimes, when he walked the halls at night, He heard quiet giggling from behind closed doors. It unsettled him, these gentle disturbances, though he told himself he welcomed the order they brought. On Sunday afternoon, the staff gathered for tea in the orangery, a glass-walled room where citrus trees grew even in the coldest English winters. The table was set with thick scones, little pots of jam, and a teapot large enough to serve a dozen. Mrs. Harrow sat at the head, pouring tea for everyone with regal efficiency. Evelyn and Amara took their places near Maria, who slipped Amara an extra lump of sugar with a conspiratorial wink. The conversation drifted from household news to village gossip. Amara listened, fascinated, as Mr. Bell described the upcoming village fete and how, every summer, the local children dressed as historical figures and marched past the manor gates. "You'll have to come watch, Miss Amara," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Maybe next year you'll dress as Queen Victoria herself." Amara grinned shyly, cheeks warming at the attention. It was the first time in months that Evelyn allowed herself to relax, to simply be part of a group instead of standing apart, always the observer. She caught Mrs. Harrow studying her and met her gaze directly. After a moment, the older woman's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but not disapproval either. After tea, Amara ran outside, the rain finally spent and the sky washed clean. The garden was a wonderland of puddles and reflected clouds. She twirled, arms outstretched, her laughter ringing clear as she danced among the wet roses. From the drawing room window, Alexander paused, watching her, something tugging at him, a feeling he'd forgotten, or perhaps never known, nostalgia, or hope. As dusk approached, Evelyn found herself in the drawing room, dusting the shelves and straightening the framed photographs on the mantel. She lingered over one in particular, a black and white portrait of a young Alexander, unsmiling, flanked by parents whose stern faces betrayed nothing of tenderness. She wondered about the boy he had been, and the man he had become, now so alone in this cavernous house. "Do you like the manor, Mrs. O'Carroll?" Alexander's voice startled her from her reverie. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes watchful but not unkind. Evelyn set the photo back and turned to him, her posture respectful but composed. "It's very beautiful, sir, and old houses have a way of reminding you what matters most. I think, family, belonging." Alexander considered her words, a rare smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "Not everyone finds it welcoming," he replied, almost as if testing her. Evelyn met his gaze evenly. Perhaps they never tried listening to what the house needs, rather than what they want from it. The silence between them was charged with unspoken truths, a delicate balance that neither wished to upset. Outside, Amara called for her mother, her voice echoing across the flagstones. Evelyn excused herself, and Alexander watched her go, feeling the curious ache of regret at the loss of her company. He stood for a long moment in the empty room, listening to the sounds of life drifting through the manor, a door closing, Amara's laughter, the distant clatter of teacups. He wondered if it was possible to change, after all these years. That night, as the stars emerged one by one over Surrey, Amara knelt by her window and wrote in her small, spiral notebook, "Today I had tea with everyone. Mr. Bell is funny." Mama smiled more. "I think I want to stay here." Her letters were large, uneven, but filled with hope. Downstairs, Evelyn sat by the fire in the empty kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes closed in gratitude and exhaustion. The next morning would bring new routines, fresh challenges, and the invisible tests of trust and kindness. But for now, Ashwood Manor slept, alive with the quiet promise of change. Within its ancient walls, hearts long hardened by sorrow began, ever so gently, to soften. The rhythm of Ashwood Manor shifted as the week progressed, each day bringing new routines and small comforts, but also a growing sense of anticipation. Alexander, who had watched Evelyn and Amara settle into their roles with cautious approval, found his thoughts returning again and again to the question of trust. Could kindness be genuine, or was it always a mask for something else? It was with this question in mind that he made an unusual decision. He would host a small, exclusive reception for several influential friends and business partners, an event that would test not only the efficiency of his staff, but the discretion and character of his newest arrivals. The announcement was made one cool Tuesday morning. Mrs. Harrow summoned the staff into the kitchen, her clipboard in hand and her expression as severe as ever. "Mr. Wycliffe will be hosting a reception this Friday. The house is to be in perfect order. There will be no mistakes." Her gaze lingered on Evelyn, then flicked to Amara, who had paused in the doorway, a book clutched to her chest. Children are not to be seen during the event. The message was clear. Ashwood Manor would tolerate no surprises. Evelyn accepted her new tasks with her usual calm, but a knot of worry began to form in her stomach. She knew how high the stakes were, not just for her employment, but for the fragile place she and Amara had begun to carve out in this new world. She reassured her daughter that it was only for one evening, that they would have a quiet supper together in their rooms. Amara nodded, but her eyes betrayed a mixture of disappointment and curiosity. Throughout the week, the manor was transformed into a place of subtle splendor. Silver was polished until it gleamed. Crystal glasses lined up in precise rows, and the scent of fresh flowers drifted from every corner. Evelyn worked tirelessly, her attention to detail earning the grudging respect of Mrs. Harrow and a rare approving nod from Alexander himself. Amara, meanwhile, found herself more confined than usual, her explorations curtailed as the staff bustled from room to room. She filled the hours with drawing, writing in her notebook, and peering from behind curtains at the strange new guests arriving with their fancy cars and expensive coats. On the evening of the reception, a hush fell over the house as the first guests arrived. Alexander greeted them in the grand entrance hall, his manner polished and cool. Laughter and conversation soon filled the air, and the old walls seemed to pulse with unfamiliar energy. Upstairs, in their modest room, Evelyn spread a small supper for herself and Amara, trying to distract her daughter with stories from her own childhood. But Amara's attention drifted to the sounds below, the music, the clinking of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter that drifted up through the floorboards. Halfway through the evening, as the festivities reached their peak, Mrs. Harrow appeared at Evelyn's door. "Mr. Wycliffe requests your presence in the kitchen. There is an issue with the wine." Evelyn glanced at Amara. "Stay here, darling. I'll be back soon." Amara nodded, but as the door closed behind her mother, a restless curiosity took hold. She wandered to the window, watching the glowing lights in the garden below, wondering what magic lay beyond her reach. In the kitchen, Evelyn found Alexander standing with Mrs. Harrow and cook, discussing the menu. The wine in question had simply been misplaced, and with a few calm words, Evelyn solved the problem. Alexander watched her, noting the efficient grace with which she moved, her calm under pressure. "Thank you, Mrs. Okoro. You may return to your room," he said, but his tone carried an undercurrent of something unspoken. He was testing her. Evelyn realized, testing her loyalty, her ability to follow instructions, her willingness to be unseen. As Evelyn made her way back upstairs, she paused outside the drawing room, catching a glimpse of the party in full swing. The guests were gathered in clusters, their laughter bright and brittle, their eyes constantly assessing one another. Alexander, in the center of it all, looked every inch the master of the manor, elegant, composed, yet somehow apart from the merriment around him. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn pitied him, surrounded by people yet utterly alone. Meanwhile, Amara's curiosity grew too strong to resist. She crept out of her room, her small feet silent on the thick carpets, and tiptoed down the corridor. The glow from the main staircase beckoned, and she followed it, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. At the landing, she paused, peering through the balustrade at the grown-ups below. They looked so different from the staff, dressed in sparkling clothes. Moving with confidence, for a long moment, she watched, unseen. Downstairs, Mr. Bell noticed a small shadow above and quietly made his way to the staircase. He knelt beside Amara, his kindly eyes full of understanding. "It's a bit noisy down there tonight, isn't it?" he whispered. Amara nodded, embarrassed to be caught. But Mr. Bell only smiled. "Nothing wrong with being curious. But let's not give Mrs. Harrow a fright, eh?" He gently guided her back toward the servants' corridor, reassuring her that there would be time to explore another day. Unbeknownst to them, Alexander had seen the brief exchange from across the hall. He caught only a glimpse of Amara, her bright eyes peering through the banister, before she slipped away with Mr. Bell. A complicated expression flickered across his face, displeasure, perhaps, but also a strange sense of relief. He turned away, returning to his guests, but the image of the little girl's curiosity lingered in his mind. The reception ended late. The guests departed with polite farewells, their laughter echoing in the now quiet halls. The staff set about restoring order, clearing glasses and straightening cushions. Evelyn returned to her room, relieved to find Amara safely asleep, her stuffed rabbit clutched close. She smoothed her daughter's hair and whispered a soft prayer of thanks. In his study, Alexander sat alone, reviewing the events of the night. His experiment had yielded unexpected results. Amara's curiosity was undeniable, but so was her respect for boundaries, gently reinforced by Mr. Bell's kindness. Evelyn had proven herself steady and discreet, yet Alexander could not shake the feeling that he was missing something vital, a thread of honesty, a spark of trust that could not be measured or planned. Long after midnight, as Ashwood Manor settled into darkness, Alexander wandered the quiet corridors. He paused outside the rooms where Evelyn and Amara slept, listening to the soft rhythms of their breath. For the first time, he wondered if his tests were truly about them or about himself, and the walls he had built so high. The seeds of change, planted almost by accident, had begun to take root in the old house. The balance between trust and suspicion trembled, waiting for the next breeze to shift it. The morning after the reception dawned heavy and gray. The manor swaddled in silence and the lingering scent of spilled wine and fresh-cut flowers. Evelyn rose early, as always, her body aching with the exhaustion of the previous day. She glanced at Amara, still asleep and tangled in her blankets. The stuffed rabbit clutched close. For a moment, Evelyn allowed herself the luxury of watching her daughter breathe, soft and untroubled, before she began the rituals of the new day. Outside their small window, a fine drizzle blurred the distant trees and gave the world an uncertain edge. Down in the kitchen, the atmosphere was taut. Mrs. Harrow reviewed the previous night's events with brisk efficiency, her gaze sharp for any sign of weakness in the staff. The reception was a success, all things considered, she said, though the edge in her voice betrayed that she had noted every minor slip and forgotten detail. Cook muttered about broken glassware, while Maria quietly stacked plates. Her eyes on the floor, Evelyn listened, accepting her share of the day's burdens, and set about restoring the house to its usual order. Yet even as she worked, a knot of anxiety remained in her chest. Had she passed Alexander's test, or merely postponed a reckoning? As the staff dispersed to their duties, Amara slipped into the kitchen, her braids slightly askew and curiosity still shining in her eyes. She helped Maria fold napkins and listened to Mr. Bell's stories about the gardens, but it was clear her thoughts were elsewhere. Evelyn watched her, torn between pride in her daughter's spirit and fear that Amara's growing confidence might one day bring them trouble. That morning, for the first time since their arrival, Evelyn caught Mrs. Harrow watching them not with suspicion, but with a strange, measured interest. Upstairs, Alexander Wycliffe retreated to his study, the room cluttered with papers from the night before. He found it difficult to concentrate, his mind drifting back to the image of Amara at the banister and Evelyn's steady composure under pressure. There was something in the girl's gaze that lingered with him, a spark he could neither name nor ignore. He realized, with some discomfort, that the experiment he'd set in motion was no longer entirely under his control. By mid-morning, the manor's routines had reasserted themselves. The echoes of laughter and music had faded, replaced by the familiar cadence of footsteps and distant conversation. Amara, released from the restrictions of the reception, wandered the hallways in search of adventure. In the walled garden, Mr. Bell showed her how to coax snails from beneath the wet leaves and explained the secret language of robins. For Amara, the world had expanded overnight. She saw possibility in every corner, every closed door. Evelyn, meanwhile, was summoned to the library by Alexander. She found him standing before the tall windows, his hands clasped behind his back, the morning's light painting sharp lines across his face. "Thank you for your efforts last night," he said, his tone reserved but not unkind. "You managed the chaos well." Evelyn inclined her head. "Thank you, sir." He hesitated, as if weighing his words. "Your daughter, Amara, she is a curious child. That can be both a gift and a danger in a house like this." Evelyn met his gaze, something fierce and protective rising in her chest. "She means no harm. She's simply trying to find her place." Alexander nodded, but did not press the matter further. Instead, he handed Evelyn a slim volume of poetry from the shelf. "I thought Amara might like this. My mother read it to me when I was a boy." The gesture, unexpected and almost shy, startled Evelyn. "Thank you, Mr. Wycliffe," she said, her voice softening. As she turned to leave, she wondered if she had just glimpsed a piece of the man he kept hidden from the world. The days that followed were a mixture of tension and small joys. Amara carried the book everywhere, reading aloud to the robins and reciting verses to Maria and Mr. Bell, who listened with patient delight. The staff, slowly warming to the newcomers, began to include Evelyn and Amara in their quiet rituals: tea in the kitchen, laughter in the laundry room, the sharing of small secrets and hopes. But not everyone at the manor welcomed the change. One afternoon, while fetching linens from the upstairs closet, Evelyn overheard a whispered conversation between two visiting maids from the village. "A maid's child doesn't belong in a place like this," one said. "It isn't proper." Evelyn's hands stilled, the old fear rising within her, a fear of being seen as an outsider, never truly belonging. That evening, Amara found her mother in the kitchen, her eyes shadowed by worry. "Did I do something wrong, Mama?" Amara asked quietly. Evelyn shook her head and gathered her daughter close. "No, darling, you are exactly where you're meant to be. Some people just need more time to understand." She kissed Amara's forehead and promised that together they would weather whatever storms might come. Alexander, ever the observer, noticed the subtle shift in the household. The boundaries he had so carefully maintained seemed to blur as Amara's laughter became part of the manor's daily music and Evelyn's calm strength began to soften even Mrs. Harrow's reserve. Yet with every new closeness, Alexander felt the old discomfort of vulnerability creep in. One evening, as he passed the staff quarters, he paused outside the kitchen door. Listening to the easy conversation and laughter within, he realized, with a pang, how much he missed the simple joys of connection, a longing he had buried for years. The following weekend brought a new test. Alexander announced that he would be away in London for business and left Mrs. Harrow in charge. The manor seemed to exhale in his absence, the staff loosening their routines, the mood lightening. Amara organized a game of hide-and-seek with Maria and even managed to coax a smile from Cook, who had previously seemed immune to childish antics. Evelyn, feeling the rare freedom of a day with fewer duties, allowed herself a walk in the garden, Amara at her side, their laughter mingling with the songs of the birds. But peace was short-lived. That evening, a sudden thunderstorm swept over Surrey. shaking the old manor's windows and darkening the halls. As the wind howled, the power flickered and then went out altogether, plunging the house into anxious darkness. Evelyn, come in crisis, quickly gathered candles and soothed the staff. But Amara's fear was harder to quell. "Will it be all right, Mama?" she whispered, clutching her rabbit. Evelyn wrapped her arms around her daughter and whispered stories of Lagos, where storms had once danced outside their own small window. When the power finally returned, the staff shared a quiet supper in the kitchen, grateful for each other's company. Mrs. Harrow, her face softer than usual in the candlelight, offered a rare toast to storms weathered together. The moment was simple, but it planted a new sense of unity in the house. Later, as Evelyn tucked Amara into bed, she realized that, for the first time, Ashwood Manor felt almost like a home. Far away in London, Alexander sat in a quiet restaurant, his mind wandering back to the old house and the people within it. He wondered if his absence would reveal truths he could not see from behind his walls. For the first time, he considered what it might mean to let those walls fall completely. Outside, the city lights blurred in the rain, and Alexander felt the first, unmistakable pull of longing, not for power or isolation, but for a connection he had almost forgotten how to name. The next days at Ashwood Manor passed with a deceptive sense of peace. The thunderstorm had washed the air clean, and summer sunlight now filtered gently through tall windows, painting golden squares on the ancient floorboards. Evelyn felt a growing contentment, a sense of belonging she had not dared hope for when she first arrived. Amara, more confident than ever, became a fixture in the daily life of the house, her laughter a melody that seemed to chase away the last lingering shadows. Even Mrs. Harrow, always so stern, was seen sharing quiet jokes with Cook and Maria. But beneath the surface, something in the house had shifted, like the hush before a sudden storm. Alexander returned from London late on a Thursday evening. He was tired, his suit creased and his face drawn from days of negotiation and little sleep. The journey from the city had felt longer than usual, the car headlights cutting through endless lanes of darkness. As he entered the manor, the familiar scent of wood polish and roses greeted him, stirring a longing for the warmth he had left behind. He paused in the silent entryway, feeling, just for a moment, like an outsider in his own home. The following morning, Alexander rose early, restless despite his exhaustion. He wandered the manor, noting the small but significant changes: a child's drawing taped to the pantry door, a pot of wildflowers on the kitchen windowsill, laughter drifting from the staff quarters. He lingered outside the door, listening as Amara read a poem to Maria and Mr. Bell. Their voices, soft, joyful, seemed to belong to a world that was not entirely his. A pang of envy pierced him, sharp and unfamiliar. After breakfast, Mrs. Harrow approached Alexander in the library, her manner formal but more relaxed than usual. "Everything ran smoothly while you were away, sir," she reported. "Evelyn managed things admirably. The girl is a delight. I thought you should know." Alexander met her eyes, surprised by the genuine approval in her tone. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrow," he said, sensing an unspoken invitation to trust in the community that was quietly forming within his walls. The real test came sooner than anyone expected. That afternoon, Alexander received a letter, a formal complaint from one of his most important business partners, who had attended the reception. The complaint was veiled but unmistakable: questions about the presence of a servant's child in the manor, whispers about changing standards, hints that Ashwood was not what it once was. Alexander read the letter twice, his hands growing cold. It was the sort of threat that could unravel his hard-won reputation, jeopardize everything he had built. He summoned Evelyn to his study. She arrived promptly, her posture as composed as ever, but anxiety flickered in her eyes. "There's been a complaint," Alexander began, voice carefully neutral. "It concerns Amara's presence in the house. Some guests find it unorthodox." Evelyn listened in silence, her face unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the mantel. "Do you wish us to leave, sir?" she finally asked, her voice steady but tight with pain. Alexander hesitated. The answer lodged somewhere between his mind and his heart. He saw not just a housekeeper standing before him, but a mother fighting for her child's future. "No," he said, finally, "I do not wish that, but you must understand, this is not just about you. There are expectations, pressures I cannot simply ignore." Evelyn nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I understand, sir, but Amara is a child. She has broken no rule. She only wants to belong." The conversation haunted Alexander for the rest of the day. He walked the grounds, replaying Evelyn's words in his mind. The sunlight seemed harsher, the manor's beauty suddenly cold and fragile. In the garden, he saw Amara and Mr. Bell kneeling by the rose bushes, their laughter echoing across the lawn. The sight filled him with a mix of pride and fear. Pride at the happiness he had helped create. Fear that it could be destroyed so easily by the world's cruelty. Late that night, Alexander found himself unable to sleep. He sat in his study, the complaint letter open before him, moonlight spilling across the desk. He remembered his own childhood in the manor, the loneliness, the endless rules, the sense of never truly belonging even in his own home. He realized with a start that he had become the very guardian of tradition he once resented, the gatekeeper of a world closed to those who needed it most. In a moment of impulse, Alexander went to the staff quarters, knocking gently on Evelyn's door. She answered, startled and half awake, but immediately straightened at the sight of her employer. "May I come in?" he asked softly. She nodded. In the dim glow of the bedside lamp, Amara slept peacefully, her rabbit tucked under her chin. Alexander's voice was low, almost hesitant. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Okoro, and to Amara as well. I allowed others' opinions to cloud my judgment. This is your home, too. If you'll stay, I would be honored." Tears slipped silently down Evelyn's cheeks, relief and gratitude flooding her expression. "Thank you, Mr. Wycliffe," she whispered. He nodded, unable to trust himself to speak further, and retreated into the quiet hallway, the weight on his shoulders finally beginning to lift. The next morning, the mood in the manor was transformed. The staff sensed a shift, something subtle but profound, like the change in air before a long-awaited rain. Evelyn moved through her duties with a lighter step, and Amara, sensing the change in her mother, sang softly to herself as she played. Even Mrs. Harrow, noticing the light in Evelyn's eyes, smiled with genuine warmth. Word spread quickly through the house that Alexander had stood by Evelyn and Amara. Some staff expressed surprise, others approval. Mr. Bell, upon hearing the news, gifted Amara a small rosebush for the garden, telling her that it, too, would take root and flourish in the right soil. The simple act became a symbol, quietly celebrated by all who called Ashwood home. That evening, as twilight deepened, Alexander stood on the manor's balcony, watching the family he'd found, and finally accepted, move through the golden glow of the garden below. The walls he had built, stone by careful stone, now seemed less like a fortress and more like the foundation for something new. For the first time in his life, Alexander allowed himself to hope, not for solitude or protection, but for the joy that comes only from letting others in. The days after Alexander's decision brought a gentle, almost surreal peace to Ashwood Manor. It was as though the house itself breathed a sigh of relief, the ancient timbers creaking contentedly as new patterns of life settled into place. For the first time, the fear of losing everything no longer haunted Evelyn's dreams. She moved through her work with renewed confidence, her laughter echoing through the halls as freely as her daughter's. Amara, more at ease than she had ever been, found herself welcomed by all. Maria, once so reserved, braided flowers into Amara's hair as they sat in the garden. Cook, whose kindness often hid behind a brusque exterior, taught her to make scones from scratch, letting her knead the dough and sneak tastes of jam. Mr. Bell included Amara in his daily rituals, showing her the secrets of pruning, how to identify birds by their song, and telling her old folk tales as they planted the rosebush together. Even Mrs. Harrow, who once would have frowned at such informality, softened. She began inviting Evelyn and Amara to her small parlor for tea on Sundays, sharing memories of her own childhood in the manor and quietly offering advice on village life. Her approval, once hard-won, now felt like an unspoken promise: you belong. Alexander, meanwhile, became a quieter presence in the daily running of the household, but his absence was no longer marked by tension or dread. He was more likely to be seen walking the gardens at dusk, stopping to chat with Mr. Bell about the state of the hedgerows or complimenting Cook on a well-baked loaf. Sometimes he would pause in the doorway of the kitchen, watching Amara and Evelyn laugh together, a wistful smile flickering across his face. The staff noticed the change, and it brought a new sense of unity to the house. Tasks were accomplished more easily. Even the hardest days seemed lighter. The burden of unspoken rules and silent judgment had lifted, replaced by a spirit of mutual care. People lingered at the kitchen table over tea, shared stories and dreams, and helped each other without being asked. Ashwood Manor had always been grand, but now it was finally warm. Outside, the summer deepened. The gardens flourished under Mr. Bell's care, and Amara's rosebush blossomed with small, perfect flowers. Children from the nearby village, once hesitant to approach the estate, began to visit. Drawn by Amara's stories and her growing confidence, laughter filled the air, and the old stone walls, once so imposing, seemed to embrace the noise rather than repel it. One bright morning, a letter arrived from London. This time, it was not a complaint, but a note from Alexander's business partner, the same who had once objected to Amara's presence. The partner wrote, "I have heard from others of the changes at Ashwood. There's talk of kindness and innovation there. Perhaps we all have something to learn." Alexander read the letter with a wry smile, feeling the old weight of expectation slip further from his shoulders. For Evelyn, the transformation of the manor was more than professional success. It was a quiet vindication of her choices. She no longer feared each day's arrival. She began taking evening walks with Amara along the edge of the woods, teaching her songs from Nigeria and pointing out the first stars as dusk fell. The bonds between mother and daughter, tested so many times, felt stronger and more luminous than ever. Amara thrived. She started her first lessons at the local school, nervous at first but quickly making friends. The teachers, curious about the newcomer from the manor, soon came to admire her cleverness and curiosity. At home, she wrote stories about the gardens, drew pictures of the house, and invented new games for the children who now visited so often. On Sundays, the kitchen became a gathering place for the entire staff and their families. Mrs. Harrow presided over these informal feasts, declaring that the heart of any house is the kitchen. Evelyn and Maria prepared food together. Cook told stories, and even Alexander would sometimes appear, bringing a bottle of wine or a new book to share with Amara. The boundaries between servant and master blurred until they barely existed at all. The village, once wary of the grand estate and its reclusive master, began to view Ashwood in a new light. People who had never set foot beyond the gates now came for garden tours, charity events, and simple visits. The house that had once guarded its secrets so fiercely was now open, still proud, but filled with laughter, music, and light. As summer faded into autumn, Alexander found himself changed in ways he could never have anticipated. He still worked long hours, but he also sought out the company of his staff, sharing in their joys and sorrows. He learned that leadership was not about distance, but about trust, and that happiness, once allowed in, could be quietly contagious. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the manor glowed in the golden light, Alexander joined Evelyn and Amara in the garden. Together, They watched as Amara's rosebush, now taller than her waist, bloomed in a riot of color. Evelyn caught Alexander's gaze and, in that silent moment, they shared a sense of accomplishment and belonging that needed no words. That night, as the lights of Ashwood Manor shone warm and steady in the dark, Evelyn wrote in her journal, "We have found a home," she wrote, "not in the walls or the rooms, but in the hearts we've come to trust." Outside, the old house seemed to listen, at peace at last, as laughter drifted through its halls and hope blossomed, quiet, steadfast, and utterly real. The crisp air of early autumn brought a new clarity to Ashwood Manor. Each morning dawned with a quiet promise, mist rolling off the meadows, leaves turning to gold, and a sense of calm settling over the ancient house. Evelyn stood at the window of her room, watching Amara run through the dew-laden grass, her laughter ringing like a bell. In that moment, Evelyn realized that all her worries, the years of hardship and uncertainty, had finally faded into memory. Here, she and her daughter had found not only refuge, but a true beginning. Downstairs, the household had fallen into an easy, harmonious rhythm. The boundaries that had once divided the staff from the master now seemed to exist only in memory. Cook greeted everyone with extra scones. Mrs. Harrow's sharp edges had softened into gentle guidance, and Maria could be heard singing as she folded linens. Even the old manor cat, once suspicious and aloof, now basked in the sun by the kitchen door, purring contentedly while Amara scratched behind its ears. Alexander, for his part, had shed the last remnants of his isolation. He spent his mornings tending the gardens with Mr. Bell, learning to appreciate the patience required to coax life from the earth. His afternoons were often spent in the study, not with spreadsheets or correspondence, but with books of poetry and history, which he sometimes read aloud to Amara in the evenings by the fire. He had learned, at last, that fulfillment came not from power or possessions, but from the warmth of shared experience. The changes at Ashwood did not go unnoticed in the wider community. The manor, once a symbol of division, had become a gathering place. Villagers arrived each weekend for open gardens, music recitals, and charity fairs organized by Evelyn and the staff. Amara, shy at first, delighted in guiding new friends through the rosebushes and ancient yew hedges, her confidence growing with every cheerful guest. One Saturday, a harvest celebration was held in the manor's great hall. Tables groaned under platters of roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and pies fragrant with cinnamon. Alexander, in shirt sleeves, poured cider for guests while Cook boasted of Amara's help in the kitchen. Evelyn led a toast to community, and laughter echoed up to the beams overhead. That evening, as lanterns glowed in the trees outside, a fiddler tune carried across the lawns, and the manor was filled with a sense of joy that seemed both ancient and utterly new. But life, Evelyn knew, was never without its challenges. Rumors, though quieter now, occasionally resurfaced in the village, old suspicions about outsiders, worries that the changes at Ashwood were too much, too fast. Evelyn sometimes heard the whispers when she went to market. Yet now, she met such doubts with steady calm, her head held high. She knew the truth of what had been built inside those walls, a home rooted in respect and hope, not in fear. For Amara, the months passed in a blur of discovery. She learned to ride a bicycle, to bake bread, and to speak a little French from Maria. She wrote stories in her notebook, tales of magical houses and brave girls, always with a rose garden at their heart. Her teachers praised her creativity, and her classmates soon stopped seeing her as the girl from the manor, instead welcoming her as one of their own. Evelyn herself began to grow in ways she had never expected. With Alexander's encouragement, she started an after-school program for village children at the manor, teaching them crafts and songs from Nigeria. The laughter of children, English, Nigerian, and everything in between, became the manor's new music. For the first time since her husband's death, Evelyn felt not only secure, but powerful in her own quiet way. Alexander and Evelyn's partnership, forged in adversity, grew into a deep and trusting friendship. They often walked together in the evenings, discussing the future of the manor, sharing hopes and worries. Sometimes, they would fall into companionable silence, content simply to be in each other's company as the sun set behind the old stone walls. As the first frost dusted the lawns, Alexander called a meeting of the household in the kitchen. He thanked each person for their hard work and loyalty, acknowledging that Ashwood's transformation had been a true team effort. He announced plans to open a scholarship fund for local children, a gesture that brought cheers and grateful tears. Evelyn caught his eye across the table, and he nodded, a silent promise passing between them. Christmas came with a rare dusting of snow. The manor sparkled with decorations, and for the first time in years, a towering pine tree stood in the great hall. Amara and the village children decorated it with handmade ornaments while Cook and Maria sang carols. On Christmas Eve, the staff and their families gathered by the fire, exchanging gifts and stories. Alexander read aloud from Dickens, his voice warm and sure, and Evelyn watched the scene with full heart, her hand resting gently on Amara's shoulder. As the year turned, Alexander found himself reflecting on all that had changed. The walls that had once kept him apart from the world now sheltered something precious: love, friendship, and a sense of belonging. He no longer feared the vulnerability that came with letting others in. Instead, he welcomed it, knowing that only by sharing himself could he truly honor the legacy of Ashwood Manor. On a clear, cold morning, Evelyn stood with Alexander and Amara in the garden, watching as the first snowdrops poked through the earth. "We did it," Alexander murmured, and Evelyn smiled. "Yes, we did." Amara grinned, her mittened hand squeezed tight in her mother's. And in that small circle, hope bloomed as surely as the first flowers of spring. That night, as the household settled in for a new year, Evelyn wrote one final entry in her journal. "Change comes softly, like the dawn," she wrote. "We have made a family here, built not from blood or fortune, but from kindness, courage, and the will to hope." The lamps in Ashwood Manor glowed late into the night, shining a light on all that had been lost and all that had finally, beautifully, been found.